David, I'm going to start with you because we were talking in the session before this last one, just before coffee, where people very rightly brought us back. Kind of, your heads are in the clouds. You're talking about kind of, mobile, platforms and mobile money. And what about the fact that, you've got a huge section of the population that can't afford M-Pesa? A thing that we think is a low-cost transaction mechanism is actually unaffordable. And that brings us to the business that you're doing, which is really kind of going out into the rural areas and trying to do business there. Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, trying to. I mean, it's definitely not low-hanging fruits and nothing to do with urbanites in Nairobi. What we're trying to do is go out in the rural areas and do kind of micro asset financing for just the normal Kenyan population. You're talking solar products, cook stoves. And I was actually surprised that you invited us here because we don't have any, sexy app or fintech behind. I can't come up with, alternative data to underwrite our loans. It's run by grandmothers in the villages, right? But I think the innovation comes in from combining elements of microfinance and group lending with a retail space. Microfinance hasn't been comfortable really with doing distribution, and distributors didn't necessarily know how to do the financing elements. So we're trying to combine that, and I think often and throughout the day I've realized that maybe sometimes innovation is taken as tech, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Yeah. I think on this continent and within Kenya, that I personally know a bit better, there is so much space for opportunities to innovate alongside, and in more maybe industries that seem like very old-fashioned, like microfinance. But breaking that down and opening it up can open markets.
And I'm gonna probe there a little bit because in one of the earlier panels we almost had a sort of fist fight about kind of where is the innovation, what is the innovation, and what is your innovation? What is the business innovation behind it?
The innovation is really bringing loans that are average about $60 and being able to lend for products, at that level.
So you're lending to a grandmother who then does what? Just talk me through.
She would use it, but we would use the grandmother is our sales channel.
Okay.
There's no e-commerce, no app. I think in a country like Kenya, you have a lot of trust issues where you buy products from. And I think that's why I believe e-commerce in this country will still take a little while to kick off, because you don't trust whether you're going to really get this thing that you ordered online. And really using a sort of Tupperware style model where the grandmothers are the clients themselves, they are users and recommended, and through word of mouth and incentive schemes that we come up with really kind of spread that, and with the group lending be able to access a much larger population than would be able to afford these items.
Yeah. Doc, let's move to you next, because again we've been your background was kind of big energy, big power. You've sort of turned that on its head, and you're now doing kind of energy and connectivity sort of in the village. Tell us what you're doing.
First of all, I'm happy to be here in Kenya. It's been an amazing time to look at what if we were to bring energy to the 1.2 billion people on the planet that's not electrified. What if we then were to provide connectivity for the 3.5 billion people on the planet, mostly in areas of countries like Africa? And thirdly, what if we were to bring commerce to that last 2.5 billion people on the planet? And the fact that focusing on Africa in particular, I had the pleasure for the past 5 years to focus on this continent as an assistant secretary in the Obama administration. We started Power Africa. We started to focus on Africa to make sure that we bring the abilities in the U.S. back to my mother country, Africa. So it's important for me to look at what we can do focusing on the most remote areas of Africa. What if we were to look at that grandmother in that rural village, and how do we bring electricity and bring energy to her? Because it is very clear once the continent of Africa is electrified, it is already the richest continent on this planet. So there should be no reason why the people here are suffering as they have for decades and for centuries. So that is the focus that the Obama administration, what I purposely was on economic development. So now we have this product. It's based on the Internet of Things. It was actually named along with Elon Musk, one of the three ideas to actually change the face of energy on this planet. So I have the fortune of being the CEO of this foundation. And I also have the fortune of working with these folks that this business started in the Silicon Valley with a COO who flipped a $3.5 billion software business. And the partners that are involved with this will look at how we will replace the kerosene. We want to have that villagers no longer have to go out with the kerosene and with the safety and health issues involved. This product that we have is a solar-based internet, what we call it, connecting home systems that go into your rural villages. It just needs a solar panel, a battery. It has this unit that we've developed, and it not only we're not selling some solar piece of equipment to you. We're actually looking at the technology around the Internet of Things. We're looking at how we would then bring this product into any village and be able to provide connectivity for their phones, the internet, everything right there in the homes. We've already started this in India. Have hundreds of thousands of these units in place. We have had the government to support us with that. But what if you're able to have not only off the grid for sure, not only a microgrid, I think like one of the speakers mentioned this morning, from a nano approach, and going into these villages and building from the villages out, not like my old companies that I worked with I've been an officer in ABB, General Electric, Westinghouse, at the highest corporate level, those bringing those big power generation products to your country. I'm on the reverse side of that. And we're going to look at how we start from the village, grow up, and then electrify this continent once and for all.
And John, how does one make that affordable if we're talking about these grandmothers?
This unit is only $250. That includes the panel, the battery, and the unit itself. It would also be financed as well through a lot of the government support in India. We're working with Ethiopia is the first country we're focusing on. We're looking at East Africa in particular, which will be Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So it's those 4 East Africa countries that we're kicking this on.
And tell us, kind of, if you look at where you've already got these hundreds of thousands installed in India, what is happening in the villages? What are you seeing? What are the changes that one starts to see?
It's empowering the women. It's empowering the youth. And I'm focusing on 4 E's. Once you empower the woman of a family, the family is very successful. And that's the secret sauce behind this is empower. Once you empower that woman in the village who no longer has to go out and risk the safety going out, getting this kerosene and whatever to provide electricity and light into their homes. So the whole thing now is to make sure that we work with not only the government, but we're working a lot with electric utilities. They aren't fighting it anymore. They realize not everything's going to be on grid. They have to embrace the off-grid opportunity, because if we sit here and wait for all the on-grid technology, we'll be sitting in this room 20 years from now with the same problem that we've had for hundreds of years. So we have to understand that we could just go and we could start with the villages and touch that 7 billionth person on the continent. In India, between India and Africa, those 2 areas.
And Ronnie, I'm going to bring you in here, because conceptually, if one thinks about this grandmother in the village with no lights, no power, no anything, and the world in which you work, which is kind of high-end digital automation, how do these 2 worlds connect? What happens when they collide?
That's an interesting question, because at the end of the day, it's really a question of education and infrastructure. How are we creating an infrastructure that would enable people access to education and learning, even if they are in rural areas and in the villages? And through connectivity, I think that's very possible. And I think that's a lot of what the work that you guys are talking about as well, is enabling people without having to geographically displace them in order to give them access through urbanization. I don't think these two worlds collide. I think these worlds right now are being separate from each other, and it's a matter of creating a bridge so people can start to adapt to the changes that are happening on the technological end of things and more advanced societies, and bring that knowledge back into areas that people don't have access to in order for them to become more empowered and become more integrated within the new economy. Otherwise, we are headed to a place where there's always going to be segregation. We're always going to have societies that are highly developed and then societies that are very poor and underdeveloped. So it's really a matter of, again, creating that bridge and facilitating those two worlds to come together rather than thinking that there is a collision. Actually, we need to build a bridge and bring them closer. And I think it's a matter of involving the government to become more active and creating more initiatives that would facilitate that, and also involvement of the private sector to try to get involved more in bringing that knowledge and connectivity and facilitating the adoption of new technologies to rural areas. So again, it's all about connecting people, not about segregation and separation.
So I mean, one of the questions, one of the themes that we've been playing with kind of all day, and I've got to say something that I've been interested in for a while and that we've been writing about, is this question that sort of says, is all of the stuff that's happening in kind of, Industrial Revolution 4.0 and kind of AI and additive manufacturing and all of that stuff, kind of speeding up the development of the rich world at such a pace that actually the gap is just widening? And I know we've had some different views on that earlier, but is technology going to open the gap, or does it give us the opportunity to really close the gap? And I'm going to ask you to weigh in on that and then throw it open to everyone else.
I think it really depends on how we look at it, but I don't think technology is about separation. If anything, technology has been creating more connection and closing the gap between people. Before the digital age, people were still dependent on connecting with each other through geography and localization. And now we are in a fully digitized age, mostly in most countries. And we have a globalization trend where economies are open to each other. People can connect with each other anywhere around the world. And it's no longer impossible to get people to collaborate and to coordinate together in order to elevate each other. And it's a proof of what we have here in the room. There's people coming from different parts of the world, creating initiatives across Africa, tackling different problems, different areas. So we are at that place where technology is helping and it's creating more advancement at a societal level. It's just a matter of expediting the adaptability of the people to the changes in technology. So we don't have that segregation again in the future, as we move into the future.
And I think, we interviewed probably the top 50 corporations around the world. And we asked them the top 3 things that would make them to keep them number 1 and number 2 around the globe. Number 1 was technology. Guess what number 2 was? Women and diversity. And guess what number 3 is? Innovation. You can't get innovation without number 2. So it's important to understand that technology is a piece, but just understanding the wealth that's here in Africa. I mean, you don't have Mark Zuckerberg hanging around Africa for no reason other than to make sure all this wonderful, smart youth that are here. It's what I wish I could do one of my typical guest speakers' speeches here today, but I don't have the time. But let me let you understand that Africa, the wealth here, the resources that exist here, but the beauty of Africa are the people here in Africa. The most amazing, smart people that you will ever run into in your life are here in Africa. So it's understood that now we need to leverage that, and the rest of the world realize that we cannot grow globally without Africa being completely electrified, people being completely empowered, or the rest of the world will suffer. And we're at that point now, and that's where the U.S. has seen the importance. I know during my administration, with the Obama administration, we saw that. We want that to continue around the globe. But and that's why I'm spending a lot of time in Africa for the past 5 years, and I will remain here until we up the focus on our youth, empowering the next age of young professionals, and I'm focusing on entrepreneurship in Africa, and we could bring those 4 E's around this amazing product we have, and we will change the world, and we will start with Africa and India, the 2 continents we're focusing on.
David, I'm going to come back to you, because you sort of said earlier you're kind of not quite sure why you're in the room, and one of the reasons that you are in the room is to kind of perhaps be the reality check. And the reality check is, again, are our heads just stuck in the clouds? Is the world that we're talking about here totally divorced from the grandmother in...
To be honest, Jonathan, I think so. Absolutely. And replying to you, I completely agree where we need to go, but I don't think we're going there, because technology has exactly the same biases than money has anywhere, right? If you look at what fintech has done and versus what it can do and what it was promised, right? At the end, fintech, again, in this country, what have you seen coming out of the fintech? A huge betting bubble. Right? Fintech, the lending that happens in this country through fintech is on Friday evening, right? So who's withdrawing these loans? These young males wanting to buy their beers, right? And Saturday wanting to bet on the Premier League. So there would be so many opportunities to empower women, and those are the users of the electricity out there in the villages, right? And they run their families, and as soon as they have more income, it goes directly straight back to the families. But I don't think technology will solve that, or a transformation into the digital, into the 4.0 or 5.0. I've lost the count where we are at. The grandmother in the village is still at 0.0, right? Cooking with firewood and not having lighting apart from kerosene, and really struggling about how to pay school fees. And we talked about health earlier as a big sector. I mean, these grandmothers, they're 50 years old. It's not a 90-year-old grandmother, they're 50. And I think there's a lot of spaces in the education sector where a lot of innovation is happening, and I think I see quite a bit of opportunities. But I think the reality check here is that I think we always underestimate how quickly these transitions happen, and then we underestimate the impact that they have. So there will be profound impact of these digital transformations, but I think it will still take a long time to penetrate beyond this kind of Nairobi bubble that we are in.
Is this the voice of despair? I mean,
No, I mean that's why you start in the villages with this technology that we are deploying, making change in lives. We can go into a hut that's no bigger than where I'm sitting, and we've done that. We've turned a light bulb on in a hut by putting that panel, and now that woman in that hut at night that won't have to worry about some safety issues, because there's light in her hut, and her kid that had to stop studying for school when the sun went down, now can study throughout the night. So it's that kind of rural impact immediately. These things could be deployed in a matter of days, and not, like I said, you can't wait to the big infrastructure of electricity. That's why you have to do what we're doing, going into the rural areas with immediate impact. And that's how you will deploy to change this continent around, to electrify this continent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to add to that, because I think that's a great point. It's all about strategic, practical execution of solutions right on the ground. I mean, yes, there is a certain reality that we're dealing with, but at the same time, we're not here because we want to accept reality, right? We're here because we are futurists, innovators, thinkers that want to change things and make them better. So we can either accept reality and say, well, we can't do much about it. These people have a certain reality that they live in, and they're used to doing things in a certain way. So let's just work with that. I think that does not help to elevate society. It's good to keep our eyes on what's happening now, so we can understand what are the strategic steps and the practical solutions that we can start to put in place to start advancing these societies from a micro societal level in small areas all the way to large metropolitan areas.
Absolutely.
So
I think
we have to keep an idealistic point of view. Otherwise, there is no point of being here. But in parallel to that idealism of changing the world and wanting to create amazing technologies and innovating, we have to do the work that needs to be done.
Right.
So keep the positive attitude.
And it's not by chance you have Microsoft, MasterCard, Vodafone, BYD, the Gates Foundation are interested in this particular technology because it will do that very thing of not waiting around to Big Brother or Big Daddy comes around and make a difference for this continent. We as a society globally cannot wait. We cannot afford for India and Africa to continue on this trajectory as it has for centuries. So how do we get there? Technology will enable us. And solar energy, when you look at where does the sun shine the most around the world? It's on top of India and Africa. So why in the world have we not figured out how to use solar energy more effectively to improve the lives of folks on these planets and these continents? That is what we've been focusing on in the U.S. with some of this technology. And I know that's what we focus on at the Department of Energy, and I know that's what President Obama has. I am in his home country. And it's important that we do something, and this will continue to focus on. And energy is what I know. I've done energy for 30 plus years, from a corporate officer in ABB, Westinghouse, General Electric. I have been the big boy. So it is now time for us to focus on how we will support these countries, and Africa in particular for me. We will energize and we will electrify this continent. And it will be done at the rural level. It will be done in villages. It will no longer be done with big electric utilities waiting to pull transmission lines across these villages, because it's not going to happen. So we will do what we do to make that impact immediately.
Dot, I'm going to open up to the floor, so if we get the mic ready. But before I do that, I'm just going to push back with one question, because I've got to say, I'm a huge fan of this kind of distributed energy model, and I think it's got a huge potential and changes lives. But the pushback that I get when I talk to kind of economists, and I'm sure if Carlos was still here, I'm not sure if he is. There we go. Feel free. We'll send you the mic. The kind of pushback is to say, it is great that the family, kind of out in the village has now got light in their life. Their lives are changed, but you can't do kind of big productive stuff. You can't do big economic stuff on the back of that. And I sort of wonder, kind of, how far does this take us?
Do you want to start with that?
Well, that's the difference. You would have certain level, like in India, the ways, the leader of India now is really embracing to make sure they support the rural communities in the villages. So they have support. We have funding. We've opened up what we call one of the largest funding to support. It's a $50 million funding that we've gotten just to deploy that. And the villagers, it's on a lottery system, so that's how they're picked as to who get to participate. So it's been funding, and we've gotten those deployed. And this allowed the banking, the folks to be realized to not everyone have bank accounts. So there's a way that the system is deployed without that. So it's not going to take a lot of monies to get these units deployed and this whole Internet of Things technology into these villages.
Yeah. Carlos, can we have the mic over here? And I'm really going to pick on you, but I just kind of, to what extent are we deluding ourselves in saying, we can substitute the kind of big hard stuff with distributed power, and to what extent can we say, actually, this is the solution and it's going to work?
Well, of course, I'm supportive of off-grid solutions as a way of improving people's lives and making sure that access to energy is universal. This is a very noble goal, but it's not going to provoke industrialization. It's not going to respond to the kind of economic transformation that we require. It's going to improve people's lives. And by doing so, of course, the livelihoods are going to be much better in those regions. But what we need is much more fundamental, is what structural transformation requires. And you describe it as big stuff. If you really want to just do one of the most obvious transformations in Africa, which is to add value addition to our commodity exports. And we are not talking about rocket science, but just improving value addition by 10% creates about 5 million jobs in Africa. And to do that, you basically need to do things like smelting. You are not going to do that with the kind of solutions that we have right now for solar energy or renewable energies in general, except for hydro. So we need both. It's not a question of choosing one or the other. We need both.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like we used to say, we need all of the above energy sources. I mean, by no means I'm saying we're not going to use oil and gas, or we're not going to use anything else. But what I'm saying, you just can't go down the big route only. You would have to have a combination of both solutions to get us there. And that's what we're talking about here, is how do you do something different than what we've done traditionally. Otherwise, we'll be here having the same conversation 10 years from now. So how do we combine from ground up the big approach, the rural approach, and then that's how you move the dime.
Let's see, so we've got the mic down here, and again, are there any sort of other comments, questions, agreements or disagreements? Do I see any hands waving? And if my fellow panelists who've got better eyesight than me, I don't, no? Yeah, I see a hand over there. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, and especially to the gentleman on the stage who wasn't clear why he was on stage. I really like you're throwing in some new perspectives. My name is Kees van Ede, I work for CarePay, and we run a service called Antiba, which is displayed behind us. I was wondering, what should we do in the Nairobi bubble to make a difference? I really like you challenging us, but give us some pointers on what should we do differently.
Yeah. Great. Let's just see if there's another question or comment. Let's take that, and do I see any other hands? No? Okay, so what should we be doing differently?
Yeah, very good question. And what should we do differently within the Nairobi bubble, right? I think lots of stuff could be done, within the cities, and there we're back to the factories and I think employment generation, and I think that will be a big driver. I'm not a believer in the whole leapfrogging to a digital economy. I think, Kenya as a nation will also need to go through an industrial process before really these benefits of digitalization kick in. Obviously, factories can be more efficient with new technologies coming in. Education is one sector that I think people spend a lot of money on within this country, and really kind of going out, even the grandmothers, when you ask them what is their number one problem, it's school fees, and that is not different up country, and it's not different here. And with so many youth unemployed, there is such a drive to get those grades, and you've seen so many universities pop up in this country and in others in this region where you get some sort of grade. It doesn't tell you very much, but you have a master. There's such a grade inflation, and everyone is willing to pay for it. I don't know where that's going to lead, but I think the edutech is an aspect that could be both profitable and very, very impactful.
Great. You've just given us a sort of view of kind of what should we be doing in the Nairobi bubble, and I'm going to bring in our other two panelists, because they're able to give us a perspective both from the Valley, but also I guess, Dot, you would know Washington inside out, and I'm just quite keen. Let's just broaden this out a bit now, and let's start talking beyond the Nairobi bubble, but beyond the bubbles of the businesses that you're involved in, and let's just, we've seen some quite dramatic shifts in the political landscape in the US. Is that polite enough? I mean, both in Washington, but then in the Valley and the kind of sort of investor world. I mean, how much bandwidth is there right now for Africa? How much is Africa kind of even on the agenda? Let's start with Washington.
Well, you know, Power Africa started during the past administration. They are continuing that now. I was just at a reverse trade mission that USTDA held in my home city of Atlanta, Georgia, just last week. And it was on Kenya was there, Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Uganda. And we were focusing on the smart grid. So there's continued support for even this administration on Africa, again, because of the importance of Africa in the development of solar power and renewable energy, but also the traditional fossil energy. Oil and gas is a big focus here as well. So, you know, it's about the economics of following the dollar and how it makes an impact globally.
And I'm going to, again, I'm being perhaps a bit unfair because this is not your kind of day job these days, but the question that people on the continent are asking is to say, you know, since you had successive administrations with various, you know, commitments to Africa, be it Power Africa, be it PEPFAR, and you did see a clear kind of political commitment to saying we want to engage.
Right.
And for the past year, we've seen absolute kind of silence. I
think it's been silent in the media per se, but you understand, those of us that were political, we're only there for a brief period of time, but it's those career people in the, you know, State Department, in USTDA, in the Department of Energy. So a lot of the stuff that was developed 8 years ago have become policy and practices, and you know, they aren't just uprooted in a matter of years. So what you hear in the media versus what's really happening and the impact the U.S. is doing on the continent, it still prevails.
And Rania, let's talk about the investor community and the value community.
Sure. Yeah. I want to add something when it comes to the political arena as well. I think one of the major problems with government is when you have changes in administration, it's not as agile and adaptable as in the private sector where things keep moving along. When you create new programs and policies and then a new administration comes on board, like what we've seen now with the new administration, a lot of programs have been aborted, a lot of policies have been kind of ignored. There's a lot of agreements that have been made at a societal level that we agree on certain ideologies that now are being actually challenged. The question here also becomes, how efficient are governments going to be in the future as well when it comes to creating and facilitating adoption for growth within the economy? And I think the biggest problem in Africa has always been government inefficiencies due to corruption, due to deficiencies in so many areas at the infrastructural level, that there's so much now pressure and expectation on the private sector to do so much work. But that doesn't mean that we release government from its responsibility to live up to the expectation, because we will always need policy to support the efforts of the private sector and make it more viable and more conducive environment for businesses. Economically, socially, politically, it's all connected. When it comes to the investment arena as well, I think now most global giants are very interested in Africa because there's a huge potential in acquiring a new consumer base. And that's why a lot of companies and organizations are very interested in investing in Africa, because they want to get access to that consumer base. So it's not so much also about aid for the sake of we love Africa, we want to help Africa. We also want to get access to this consumer base so we can expand on our services and make more money. So we're not really outside of the capitalistic kind of ecosystem here when we're talking about global involvement within the continent. We have to stay realistic there. It's business at the end of the day, and there needs to be an understanding that when it comes to investment, there are different levels. You have NGOs that are on the ground that are non-for-profit. You have global brands that are coming in trying to capitalize on the local consumer market and trying to adapt to the needs within the region by adjusting their products and services to appeal to the consumers within the region. Companies like Google, they've been trying to help with data optimization so they can facilitate people's access to the internet and access to their applications. So you have different channels that are at the same time being activated, and each one is bringing completely new value. But when they start to come together and intersect, I think this is when we're going to start to see a much more regional impact all over Africa. Now we still have disparities, we still have cities that are more advanced than others, we still have the bubble effect where only urbanized areas are getting the most access to investments and to capital. And it really makes sense because with urbanization, it makes it easier to create ecosystems when it comes to financial services and banking, and even to create more power hubs and supplies and internet connectivity. So it is easier when you have a concentration of the population within metropolitan cities. But we go back to the question, how do we stop the segregation by distribution more, and also tackling the rural areas and not being so much stuck in that bubble where we're only concentrating on creating micro ecosystems within cities and ignoring the majority of the population outside.
Yeah.
And just on her point too,
Yes.
the digital identification, back to your point, not liking digital, but the system we have captures all that data. We know how many grandmothers are in this neighborhood, and then it becomes part of the commerce. So that becomes very valuable information to the government or to big companies like, Nike that want to bring their products into these rural areas, because we capture that data in our system.
Yeah. I wanted to follow up on Rania's point here about the government failure, right? I think it's a very interesting one because what we're seeing is the private sector filling some of those gaps. But these are also hard business models to crack because, government raises taxes, and with those taxes you fund things that usually the private sector can't do. There's the energy access, right? There are innovative business models, including the micro asset financing and all that can go around that, and you can have private sector approaches. There are private schools and innovation around how do you do that, but there are limits, right? So the private sector can't do everything what the government is failing at, and a lot of these business models, while being innovative and stretching these things in the water and sanitation sector, there are very, very few really viable business models, and there isn't the capital going there, right? The capital is going into the real estate and the middle class in the urban centers, but we don't really have that flow of the capital into the mass market. And usually, as you said, it's others looking outside and to kind of, okay, there's a new consumer base opening up. But usually they're looking at the top 20%, and we talked earlier about the 80%, and what about them? And I think there are very few business models that are out there that really tap kind of the 80% of this market. And I think there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen around there.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds each, and I'm going to ask you, I've been asking every panel for a kind of closing call to action. What is the single sort of policy, what needs to happen kind of now to really move things forward? And maybe we can
my closing call is the rising African middle class. It's a myth. Africans are either rich or poor. It's an Economist article written, I think 2 years back, so not too out of date. And really look at the mass market.
Dot?
Harnessing the invisible people, the invisible woman that we want to reach, that 7 billionth person that we want to electrify, connect, and pull into the commerce for the continent.
I think education, it's really the major problem to everything. It starts with lack of education, and I think this is where most of the energy needs to go to, is really trying to enhance educational systems in order to give people the access to quality skills so they can develop skills in computer science and robotics and areas where they can become more active to participate in the new economy that's heading more towards digitization, whether we like it or not. So we have to really work towards preparing the younger generation to become ready to integrate within the new economy. Otherwise, we're going to continue into the future with the same problem that we have. And I'm over 30 seconds.
I have given this panel a really tough job, because we have straddled everything from the grandmother, all the way through to, kind of President Obama's policies.
You were trying to say something.
So there we go. But you guys have risen to the task. It's been a fascinating conversation. So if you please join me in thanking this panel.